31st, 2014, and the reporters may not have all the answers, but we are at least asking the right questions. First up, the Minnesota terror connection.
This is the real Disneyland.
Young men leaving the Twin Cities to fight and die for terror groups overseas. Why we need to excavate Islam's ancient past for answers.
The rhetoric that they use always looks back.
Love and politics. A romance at City Hall may have come with a price tag no one quite expected. Is it a conflict of interest? We talked to the reporter who broke the story.
At this point, there's just kind of too much money changing hands.
And cycle wars. Why the open hostility towards riders?
We can't just separate people with painted lines on the streets.
Two perspectives from reporters on the bike beat.
I think it's fear, but it's fear of the unknown.
And the Breakfast Club goes deep on the Minnesota jihadist pipeline. Are we any closer to those who are really calling the shots? The reporters are ready to roll. Welcome everyone, and thanks for making the reporters part of your Sunday morning. This week we learned two young men from Minnesota traveled to Syria to fight and ultimately die for the Sunni militia terror group ISIS, or ISIL as the White House likes to call it. At least a dozen other men from the Twin Cities are believed to be fighting for ISIS as well. This all had a feeling of deja vu. It was 6 years ago that more than 20 men left the Twin Cities to fight for the terror group AlShabaab in Somalia. The real question is why? What's the ideological draw? Why travel to a war zone, to a country in some cases you've never been to fight a battle that's really not yours to begin with? To understand the appeal, you have to understand a bit of history as well, and how extremists can take that history and twist it for their own purposes. The slick recruiting videos are selling a kind of dream, a prophecy, one that's lured dozens of young men away from the Twin Cities.
This is the real Disneyland. You need to come here and join us. Take pleasure in this fun.
It led Troy Castigard to Somalia, where he died fighting for AlShabaab. And this week we learned it led Douglas McCain, Castigard's old classmate at Robbinsdale Cooper High School, to his death in Syria, fighting for ISIS, along with another Minnesotan, Abdurrahman Mahmed, who reportedly died in the same battle.
What made him go over there? You know, why was he there?
The dream they and at least 100 other Americans have followed to Iraq and Syria has a name. It's called the Caliphate.
The word has that power to attract people. It's like, we're going to create a new caliphate, Islamic State.
Hamlin Islamic Studies professor Mark Berkson says it comes from the word caliph, which roughly means successor to the Prophet Muhammad. And for ISIS, it's the promise of a pan-Islamic nation-state, beginning in Syria and Iraq, but ultimately extending from Europe, across the Middle East into Asia, and governed under a strict Sharia law by one religious and political leader. ISIS has proclaimed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi the new caliph.
The rhetoric that they use always looks back, right? It looks back at these earlier periods, but the phenomenon is totally modern. I mean, this is a 20th and 21st century post-colonial development.
Professor Berkson says ISIS has hijacked the true history of the caliphate. The golden age of Islam was the Abbasid Caliphate, a sprawling empire that existed from the 9th through the 13th centuries, based in Baghdad and known for its tolerance.
Baghdad became one of the greatest cities on earth. And Muslims from around the world and people from other religions flocked there. And so it was actually very cosmopolitan, very international.
Baghdad's House of Wisdom became the first university and led to the modern scientific method, as well as advances in mathematics and medicine. In other words, a far cry from the beheadings, rapes, and brutality ISIS is known for. A group so brutally intolerant, even Al-Qaeda keeps its distance.
They may understand the idea of the structure of a caliphate, but the actual thing that made it great, the openness to wisdom from wherever it comes, the commitment to bettering the lives of people, that doesn't seem to be a part of the current plan. Right now it's about extending their own power base.
And for ISIS, that means recruiting from the West, using social media, and having a target demographic. Castigard and McCain weren't even raised as Muslims. They converted as older teenagers. But like many of the men, they were adrift and had criminal records.
There's different people that join for different reasons. Some of them truly are the sort of hardline believers, and they believe here's our opportunity now to really enforce this strict form of Islamic law. There are others, it seems like when you look at their path, it's almost like some people joining gangs.
And now community leaders say ISIS has even begun recruiting young women from the Twin Cities.
They call them as to help out as nurses or, help the wounded. But the real catch is that they will be sexually exploited.
Minnesotans should be concerned about that because we don't want our young people to be misled and to think one thing and actually find out it's quite a different thing, and basically to succumb to propaganda.
But that may truly be the neglected battlefield for hearts and minds. Sold a dream that becomes a nightmare with no anchor in history or the words of Islam.
We just want to give our blood and use our bodies as a bridge from Khilafah.
And the crucial thing to keep in mind is that ISIS's interpretation, their understanding of what an Islamic State would look like and what Sharia law is, represents a tiny minority of Muslims worldwide. This is why some of the people who have the greatest opposition to ISIS, who fear it the most, are fellow Muslims.
And the State Department has taken that battle for the hearts and minds to social media, where it's really all playing out. Setting up a Twitter account called Think Again, Turn Away, tweeting out a picture of McCain and Castigar saying, quote, 2 U.S. men throw away lives for cult of death. Hashtag ISIS Al-Qaeda legacy. Coming up in the Breakfast Club, we are going to talk about this issue with 4 men who have worked tirelessly to stop the recruiting effort and ask, are we doing enough? For the last few weeks, we have noticed a narrative developing when it comes to bike riders, a kind of latent hostility from drivers and even some reporters about bicyclists feeling like they own the road. So we decided to check in with 2 reporters on the bike beat about peaceful coexistence between those who drive and those who pedal.
One night I was out and had a few too many drinks, tried to bike home, what I thought was just going to take a few minutes, woke up in the hospital.
Jesse Marks chronicles his own biking mishaps in this week's cover story in City Pages, which traces the evolution of biking in Minneapolis from the 19th century, when the roads were literally paved for bikers, to our present day, where we're all jockeying for space.
We can't just separate people with painted lines on the streets. You need to actually create a physical buffer because you're going up against a 3-ton piece of metal.
And while Minneapolis may be one of the top biking cities in the country, there have been a few missteps, like this configuration along First Avenue, where the bike lane is between the curb and the cars.
That was applauded at the time, 5 years ago, but now it's kind of considered a place where you wouldn't seriously want to ride.
What you would rather see, it sounds like, are things like the Greenway that we have right below us.
Absolutely.
Totally designated just for bikes.
Yes.
Walker Angel is a writer for Streets Minnesota and believes Minneapolis will one day look more like the Netherlands, without the hash bars, with buffered bike lanes that gives cars, bikes, and pedestrians all their own space. I think anger is really about fear, and I think drivers are afraid of hurting bicyclists.
I think it's fear, but it's fear of the unknown. I think you're driving down, and this happens to me when I'm driving. You're driving down the road and you're not sure what this bicycle rider in front of you is going to do.
The city of Minneapolis is now reviewing its master bike plan, which calls for 400 miles of bike trails, many of them buffered bike trails with some kind of physical separation from cars. So romance at City Hall in St. Paul may have proven very costly to taxpayers. Council member Amy Brenmoen has reportedly been in a romantic relationship with Parks and Rec director Michael Ham since February. They haven't kept it a secret, but haven't advertised it either. Wednesday, the city council approved an $800,000 settlement, the 3rd largest in city history, to Black Bear Crossings, which runs the coffee shop at the Pavilion at Como Park. The operator alleging the two conspired to terminate his lease at the Pavilion when he still had a renewal option. After the vote, we talked to the Pioneer Press's Fred Mello, who broke the story.
Some readers said, who cares? What? There's a personal life. And frankly, that was my reaction several months ago, before kind of some of the more sensitive votes started coming to light, and certainly before an $800,000 settlement was on the table. But at this point, there's just kind of too much money changing hands to not ask, wait a second, did that relationship have any influence at all?
By the way, neither the council member nor the director were present for that settlement vote. They're both traveling separately. The city attorney says there is no conflict of interest because there's no financial gain for either. But Councilmember Dan Bostrom is calling on the director to resign. Mayor Coleman says Director Ham still has his support. And here's a look at some of the other headlines making news this week. In St. Paul, police shoot and kill a man near a Holiday gas station on the city's west side. The man was a suspect in an unspecified crime. A witness says the man threw rocks and punched the officer and heard 3 or 4 shots as the man fell to the ground. The officer was not injured. The incident under investigation. The search for Kelly Phillips' killer is going into week 3, and now his fiancée wants answers as well. Nathan Bailey says he is determined to find justice and begged anyone with information to come forward. Police have identified Phillips' former partner Ty Hoffman as their main suspect. Friends of Phillips have raised more than $25,000 for a reward leading to his arrest. Phillips, you'll remember, was shot and killed at an Arden Hills gas station earlier this month. And finally, we couldn't talk about this week's headlines without mentioning the Great Minnesota Get-Together. Some great food mixed with great weather means big crowds. Overall, attendance way up from last year. In fact, the numbers are pretty striking here. As of Thursday, the fair is nearly 100,000 visitors ahead of where they were last year at this same time, and on pace to break 2009's all-time attendance record of just under, get this, 1.8 million people. That is a lot of human flesh. Up next, The Breakfast Club, 4 people who know all about the recruiting of young men and now women to fight for terror groups. How many have gone? Who's doing the recruiting? We are tackling it all straight ahead. Reporters will be right back.
I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't have a strategy yet. I think what I've seen in some of the news reports suggests that folks are getting a little further ahead of where we're at than we currently are.
President Obama making comments Thursday on ISIS and that, quote, we don't have a strategy yet, is what many of the pundits picked up on. ISIS, of course, responsible for killing American James Foley and wreaking havoc over parts of Iraq and Syria. And obviously has become an issue in the Twin Cities this week. Joining us to talk about ISIS and why young men from Minnesota are leaving to join that fight. 4 men who have dealt an awful lot with this issue. Omar Jamal, he's with the Somali mission to the UN. Mohammed Farah, he is with a youth group called Kajoog. And Abdi Bihi, a community activist. And former Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher, who is now running a group called the Somali Study for Somali History and Studies, right?
Correct.
We are going to jump into this right away. Former FBI director here in town, Richard Thornton, said today that people are leaving for Syria as we speak. That's pretty ominous. Omar, do we have any sense of how many young men have left? We were talking a couple weeks ago about a dozen. Has that number increased?
Well, one can assume it has increased because nobody can put an exact number on it. Since the positions they are leaving as we speak, it could be some focus right now at the airport leaving. So the point of putting an exact number on it is very challenging.
Abdi, you had a 15-year-old nephew who left to join AlShabaab 6 years ago. Do you have a sense of who is recruiting these young kids still? Obviously, 2 of our latest ones were not Somali. They weren't even Muslim. They didn't start out that way. But where do we think the recruiting apparatus is now, and is it different from the recruiting that went on during AlShabaab?
You know, my nephew was 17, Hassan. Yes, the recruitment never stops. But what we have noticed as a pattern is the more we are visible and engaging the community, whether it's a programs or tournaments or conversations, that makes them hide out. But the more we get tied up or the more we run out of options, then we see them coming in full force. I have noticed some recruitment taking place in a park.
In a park?
In a park where my kids attend, and I have to be visible. And this time they were using young kids, 16, 17-year-olds, boys and girls, talking to my own kids in a park.
And what do they say? What's that dialogue like?
Well, it's a doctrine. It's a doctrine. That's how it starts. They don't show up in a park and say, let's go to Syria and blow ourselves up. It's the doctrine. They make the young kids feel, blame 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, blame in a park. They talk about the religion, very strict form, and they tell them they are guilty, they are naked, and next time they should be all over covered, and they should be this. That's how it started, the basics of the doctrine.
Bob?
But the message does change and has since 2006. You know, originally with the Ethiopian invasion in Somalia, AlShabaab's recruitment was a chance to defend the homeland. That evolved then to fight against Ethiopia. And of course, when Ethiopia left, they continued to evolve. ISIS is a new animal. It it's a barbarian organization, not just a terrorist organization, but they have changed some of their marketing. Because they are trying to establish a new Islamic State, that's a completely different message than defending a Somali homeland or whatever the country might be. They're establishing a new country. And so they've incorporated that into their marketing, and that has a lot of intrigue for some young kids that feel disenfranchised by the West. And keep in mind, over 500, maybe 1,000 kids in Britain have already gone back to join ISIS. The estimates are 11,000 foreign nationals. So the message changes. It's a more religious doctrine and obligation. A lot of these kids are looking for a chance to do something significant. I mean, that's a common thing for all of us, but this is a chance to do something to help. And recently we've seen young girls that we know are going back because the Islamic State needs women to help their organization.
Yeah, I want to touch on the young girls in a sec. But Mohammed, tell me, you work a lot with the youth. Get me kind of the ground level take on this. What is the appeal? I mean, we've heard it, you know, they're disenfranchised, they're unemployed, they're kids who might otherwise have the appeal to gangs. But who are these young people and how can we combat that? How is your group doing that?
Well, you know, the group that we work with, our network, those are not the individuals who are being targeted or being engaged by these terrorist groups. It's the individuals, the other young individuals who are not being engaged. It's, you know, it's the disfranchised. It is the individuals who really are looking for a higher purpose, and they end up, you know, that higher purpose end up being with AlShabaab or ISIS. It is, you know, when you don't know enough about your religion. You know, they're at a moment where they're looking. They've tried a lot of things and it didn't work out. And where, you know, the Somali community is a faith-based community. But however, when you don't know enough about your own religion, you can easily be influenced by individuals, by these recruitments very easily. But what shows us is that we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we need to re-strategize on when it comes to radicalization.
Here's my thing. A couple years ago, we indicted about 15 people for the recruiting for AlShabaab. It seems to me that we didn't get the puppet master. We didn't get the person pulling the strings. Omar, why is that? Why have we not arrested someone, indicted someone who is really calling the shots? It seems like we're getting these mid-level players, but no one above them. Is that because they're not located here?
Well, it's not that because they're not located here. It's because if anything else, it tells you that whatever that the government or the law enforcement agencies have been doing, it's not working because the recruitment is still in a full gear. The kids are still going. So I think if anything else, what the situation calls for is to revisit the method and the strategy, the ways and means that the government has been using to counter this group, because the kids are still being recruited. And you know what? The last guy was reported to have been killed in Syria. Is more than he's above 40 years old. In the beginning, we've been led to believe that they're targeting the minors, the teenagers, the unemployed. No, this cuts the line of nationality. It cuts across the line of age. They're targeting everybody. So I think what's lacking here is to have a clear strategy to counter, as you see it, the videos they release, the propaganda videos they release, is doing the job.
So let's get to solutions. What can we do, really, because this is not just a Somali issue, obviously. Kastigar was not Somali, some of the others have not been. What can we do, Mohammed?
What we need to do is, first of all, we need to re-strategize when it comes to radicalization. In the past, on a national level, when it comes to radicalization, we always used to put our efforts and investment in the government, in the law enforcement, which is great. However, we're getting away from the real issue here, which is implementing real programs on the ground that engages young people. See, we have a strategy. Government may not have a strategy, but we have a strategy. And that strategy is to engage these young people ahead of time, play a preventive role rather than a reactive.
But as long as there is a stable ISIS state in Syria and Iraq, they will continue to recruit. Our government needs to make it very difficult for that state to grow. And once they stabilize and they secure the ground, the recruitment is going to get worse. In fact, that's already happened. Probably twice as many recruits this year as there were 3 years previous.
Do you guys think one day, very quickly, just 15 seconds left, do you think these recruits will come back one day?
I think this will definitely continue if we don't re-strategize. we definitely...
I think resources are very important. Creating jobs and programs for these young people is the key.
Actually, I'm surprised it hasn't happened that yet.
Okay, on that ominous note, we'll be right back with On the Record. So it's time to go on the record about the perils of the tan suit. This week, President Obama made a significant foreign policy address on ISIS and Russia in the Ukraine. It wasn't so much what he said that caused a stir, it was what he was wearing. A tan suit. Not his usual blue, gray, or charcoal, but tan. Apparently for some people, especially on social media, this is a sartorial sin. Is this what it's like to be a powerful woman? That's a pretty good line that was on Twitter. This is what happens when Obama bypasses Congress to purchase a suit. Other people using it to play off his campaign slogan, "Yes, we tan," or his book title, "The Audacity of Taupe." That's a pretty good one as well. Is all this silly? Absolutely. I mean, it wasn't seersucker. But optics always matter. A solid dark-colored suit says, I am bringing my A game. I am on top of this. Tan says, I've got a 2 o'clock tea time. It says, Syria? Yeah, we don't have a policy on that yet. Russia? You guys are up to no good. Although, let's face it, short of World War III, there is not much the president is able to do about either situation. Options are limited, as they say. Maybe he was rocking the tan because he's trying to lighten up what feels like an anxious, restless kind of summer. Ebola in Africa, war in the Middle East, and in some ways looking like war in Middle America, too. But the kids are going back to school. The state fair is almost over. It's time to get back to work. And as one guy on Twitter said, at least President Obama didn't wear the tan suit after Labor Day. That would be grounds for impeachment. That is the reporters for this Sunday. And our summer's over. We are going on hiatus for a while. The NFL pregame show will be in this time slot next week. It has been a very, very fun run. Thanks for watching, and we hope the reporters will be back soon. See you later.